Hello, it is Saturday night, and this is Joe Firestone live for Real Progressives. And my guest for tonight is running for Congress in the primary of the California 4th Congressional District. Roza Calderon will be joining me, and she is a Justice Democrat and a very articulate and a strong candidate, I think. So I think you're going to enjoy talking to her, and you'll enjoy going through the platform. And I think, all in all, it's going to be a good night. So, hi, Roza.
Hi. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, sure. Would you like to start us off by giving us the context of the race and talking about some of the major barriers for you in it, and who your major competition is in the race?
Okay. So I'm running in California's 4th district. And in this district, we are actually home to a few national treasures. So we have Lake Tahoe, Kings Canyon National Park, Sequoia, and the crown jewel of our national park system, which is Yosemite National Park. So we currently have Tom McClintock, who's our representative. And Tom McClintock is a well-known climate science denier. He has made mentions and is very open to opening up our public lands to mining and drilling. Something that I'm very well aware of and informed on, having worked in it myself. And the race here is, I think, parallel to almost every race that's going on in the country right now, where we're seeing loaded races. In my election in particular, we have 4 Democrats running, myself included. We have a Republican challenger, and we have Tom McClintock, who's incumbent. So when I talk about the Democrats that are running, I want to always point out that we have a spectrum of what Democrats are right now, and I represent what would be considered the progressive in the race, and mostly because my ideas make sense. I don't feel that I have to sugarcoat my views on the issues just to gain a few votes from the Republican side. And because I know that the progressive message reaches out to a larger scope of people, I know that these are issues that don't affect party lines. These are nonpartisan issues. These are human issues that we need to take care of. So in this district, the things that I'm going to be focusing on fighting for, and making sure that people understand what's happening here is number one, education. The second is the environment, because of where we live. Over 70% of our district is actual public lands, and of course, access to Medicare. By doing that through Medicare expansion for all. So those are my three top main issues right now. But something that hovers over every single thing that we're looking at is money in politics. Anything that I say, anything someone from the Republican Party says, or anything from any party or any affiliation or your ideology, no matter what it is, none of it will actually matter until we can get money out of politics. And so that is in the forefront of every single one of the speeches that I give. So that's kind of what's going on right now. And of course, my biggest challenger is McClintock. McClintock is someone who has been funded by the Coke industry. He is the only person who flipped his vote through the ACA, and that's only because the Koch brothers made that announcement that said that if they voted to repeal when the bill wasn't bad enough, that they would pull funding from candidates. Once the bill was horrible enough, then now he was totally allowed to repeal. So that's when he switched his vote. That is who McClintock is. He's a bench warmer. He's a rubber stamp for the GOP, and he is a dangerous person for being here in the shadows. So we need to get rid of him this election.
Okay, very good. Well, that certainly gives us a strong impression of the nature of the race that you're running. So let's start with the money out of politics issue, since that seems to be a very, very important one. So what are the things you would do to get money out of politics?
So here in California, one of the bills that I was an advocate for was AB 17, and by the time it passed, I think it was AB 247, which is the Transparency Act for California. So what we want to see in ads is we want to know who is trying to deceive us, right? Because we can all see commercials that come out on the TV or any ads that we hear on the radio, and they are pro-oil, they're just bashing specific groups. And at the end, it'll say paid by Californians for a happy California. So we have zero idea where that money's coming from. So one of the things that this bill is actually doing is going to make sure that the top 3 donors to that campaign or that specific organization are going to be listed in every single ad. And that's something that they can't hide from. So if we are looking at that commercial and suddenly we see Shell at the top of that list, then we know it's a special interest ad. We know who's trying to give us that message. It's not as deceitful as it was meant to be. So those are that's one thing that I would propose taking to the federal level, bringing up transparency. And of course, the most important thing of all is ending Citizens United. That has allowed huge corporate PACs to form and just have enormous amounts of money to get people elected. And that means that our elected officials are already bought and paid for before they even get into office. And that's what we're seeing with our candidates. Our candidates right now, especially in this loaded races, they'll do anything to get elected. So they're taking that corporate money, they're playing the game to be part of the game. And that's exactly where I think that we should change the game. I believe in publicly funded elections. I believe that if you want to get into Congress, today is the day that you need to renounce any corporate PAC money or any lobbying money, return it if you have to, and going there with a clean slate and donations from the people who you will be indebted to. And that way you will actually make changes for them, not the people who are pushing you or forcing you to do things that you don't truly believe in, or maybe you do believe in them. But your job as a representative is to embrace the ideas and the needs of the people that you're representing, not corporate interests.
When you get into Congress, what kinds of laws would you pass in order to change the situation with respect to money in politics?
So that would be one of them. I would, number one, put limits on the amount of money that obviously I would want to go to the Supreme Court and make sure that Citizens is overturned. Citizens United is overturned. Secondly, I would put limits on how much money can even come from any corporate interest or lobbying interest, because I think those limits are still excessive. When you look at my donations that I've received, you're looking at about less than $100,000, but you're looking at over 8,500 people who have donated to me.
Yes.
And you have people who have nearly $1 million, and they've only collected that with 1,000 people. And it is unbelievable that if I go to my party or if I go to a group and I say, well, this is how much money I have, because that's the only thing they care about, they suddenly view you as a non-viable candidate. So limits on that would be just paramount. And of course, like I said, I would support publicly funded campaigns. So maybe pushing something at the federal level so that the states can follow suit. I know that there are cities who have been able to successfully implement a publicly funded program for campaigns. And that's something that I would absolutely get behind.
Okay, so to get rid of the CU, what most people are saying now is that what has to be done is to pass an amendment.
Yes.
An amendment. But to pass one of those is likely to take from 7 to 10 years or so. So right. The question is, what do we do in the meantime?
In the meantime is just making sure that we have those limits. I really don't believe that, number one, the move to amend for the 20th Amendment, I think that's something that we all need to get behind, and even push for a little bit of a speedy process, because this is something that has drained our actual democracy in the United States. And if no one is afraid of that, especially in Congress, then we have a larger problem where they're totally okay with having corporations saying what we need to wear, how we're going to drive our children to school, who is going to be armed in schools. So I think that just pushing for publicly funded campaigns right now is the only thing that we can remedy within a 2-3 year process.
Okay, so let me ask a question then. Have you heard of the exceptions clause in the Constitution?
I have not.
Okay. The exceptions clause, is Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. Article 3 is the article that deals with the judiciary. Mm-hmm. Okay, and what Article 3, Section 2 does, it does actually a number of things, but it has a nice small phrase in it, which the framers put in, in the original Constitution, and which has never been amended. In other words, it's still still a phrase, that is in effect. And what it says is that the Congress has the power to define the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court on laws that it actually passes. So it could prohibit the Supreme Court from deciding on the constitutionality of campaign finance laws. Mm-hmm. Now, I know this will be viewed as an extreme kind of thing to do, but the framers put this phrase into the Constitution for a particular purpose. First of all, in terms of the separation of powers theory itself, it looked at the executive as the monarchical branch of the Constitution. The government, I should say. And it looked at the judiciary as the aristocratic branch of the Constitution. And since the framers were not really strong Democrats, it looked at the Senate, as another aristocratic institution. So all these other institutions were there as a check on the power of the people. But on the other hand, it also believed that it was possible for the monarchists to it was good to check the monarchical power, and it was good to check also the power of the aristocracy or the wealthy people. Okay, of course, in America, because there was not a hereditary aristocracy here. But so the House of Representatives was considered the people's house. It was the democratic part of the government as enshrined in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Okay. Over time, things have changed a little because the senators are now directly elected, of course. So that branch is more of a democratic branch, okay, than it once was in the original Constitution. But the aristocratic branch of the government, in the form of the Supreme Court, is still there, and we have kind of enshrined the power of the Supreme Court to actually review and decide on the constitutionality of our legislation as something sacred. So it's part of the unwritten Constitution, of course, okay, and remember, if it's part of the unwritten Constitution, it's unwritten. It's not really part of the Constitution because the only Constitution we really have is a written Constitution. Mm-hmm. So, but we have come to accept that the word of the Supreme Court is the final word. But the framers never intended that. They intended for the House of Representatives to have a check on the Supreme Court and the Senate, in other words, the Congress, together to have a check on the Supreme Court through Article 3, Section 2. And so the option remains open and entirely legal for the House to decide that campaigns finance laws are not to be reviewed by the Supreme Court, which, by the way, would in itself, if a new law were passed, also limiting the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to any laws that were actually previously passed, all the previous campaign finance laws could then work again. And the new law could work also. And so this would create a space, a period of years, in which campaigns finance laws would be beyond the reach of the Supreme Court and would give us time to pass an amendment and to institutionalize that in the Constitution of the United States. So when you get to Congress, that is something that you, okay, and others who know about this clause would be able to do. And you'll get some resistance from lots of other people in Congress who are going to tell you that you're doing something which breaches the unwritten Constitution of the United States. Get the same kinds of charges that FDR got when he tried to pack the Supreme Court. But once again, this phrase was put in there specifically so the Congress could control a Supreme Court that had actually run amok. That's what it was for. I'd argue that the current Supreme Court since the year 2000, long time now, has run amok. They have gone far beyond what their powers were supposed to be under the Constitution of the United States. It seems to me if there was any time when the power of the Supreme Court should be limited by Article 3, Section 2, it is this time. And if there is any Supreme Court that should be limited by this particular part of the Constitution, it is this Supreme Court.
Right, absolutely. And I completely agree with you there. But, one of the problems with that concept right now is the Congress that we currently have in place, which makes it really impossible. And that's exactly why groups like Brand New Congress and like Justice Democrats are coming in and trying to get candidates who are going to say no to corporate money and corporate influence from the beginning. Because to go in there and try to convince a group of 435 in the HR and then another 100 in the Senate, it's going to be very, very difficult. Here in my race, and actually in California in general, where I'm running, I've become public enemy number one. We keep thinking about money in politics only coming from the dark side, but you have groups who function entirely on these contributions as well. So you see groups that I have been a fan of almost my entire life staying out of races because they don't want to lose their money themselves. So that's why, like I said, one of the things that I swore up and down before I got in the race was that I was going to do it my way. And I wanted to make sure that I was going to reject corporate money even before Justice Democrats called me, even before I had to sign a piece of paper with CFAR, because I wanted to make sure that every person I knocked on their door and I asked them for $1, I said $1 to me means that I have your support. And I'm going to remember this dollar when I'm in office. And that's something that we have to push. In my race alone, that's something, that's all that they're looking at is money. And we endorsed a person who just became a Democrat just a few months before the actual convention, only to get the endorsement, had been a lifelong Republican. But they brought all this PAC money with them, and they're bringing in all these other ideas. So if we're okay with that, I mean, if that's what the party wants, then I am absolutely sure that I can renounce the Democratic Party, because I thought overall that we were supposed to be the better alternative, and we are not.
Yes. Well, I entirely agree with you on all of that, but I would point out that you don't have to convince 100 people in the Senate and 435 people
only 2/3
in the House. You only have to convince a majority,
right?
Each of the bodies, and then you have to prevent a veto from the President of the United States. If the presidency changes in 2020, then in 2021, there'll be a better opportunity to make this kind of exception in the law and to end the influence of CU but right there, right at that time. I agree that until then, it's going to be difficult, but still, if you got enough of the progressives into Congress so that you constituted a significant block of 80, 90, 100 people who were in a position to extort concessions from the rest of the Congress by refusing to vote for significant bills that they wanted, it might still be possible to get some campaign finance laws through that had such a clause in them.
Right. And that's my hope. My hope is that we can at least get. Oh, sorry. My hope is that we can at least get about. With Justice Dems, we have 51 candidates on the slate, and even if we got half of them through, it just would be just amazing. And hopefully, like you said, 2020, and then we can actually affect change in 2021. Then that's something that we have to prepare as progressives. And it's something that I say at every show that I've done, every podcast, every appearance is, progressives, please hear me out. Stick with progressives. Don't just try to get a Democrat into office. I mean, just look at what's happened with Jones, who just went into Congress and he's voting on the wrong side. So we need to select that better shade of blue or that more progressive ideals. If they are Republican or independent or whatever they may be, but they can stick to the fact that people need real representation, then that's who we need to support. We need to start pushing candidates on the issues rather than this ridiculous party lines.
Yes, I entirely agree. In fact, I would argue that even in situations, or in districts where there are no progressive candidates who are running, uh, who are Democratic Party candidates, but who instead are third party candidates, then it would be better to vote for them than to vote for the shade of blue that's going to line up with the Republicans in any case on very critical votes. And so the third party people, in the end, will probably line up with the caucus of the Democratic Party, but will extract concessions from the Democratic Party in the process. So if they get elected, and the Democratic Party needs them in order to constitute a caucus, then they will go to them and there will be bargains made, and that will improve the situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, but anyway, going on to another area, the healthcare area, of course, is a favorite of yours and a favorite of mine also. So could you go into a little more detail about what you favor in the healthcare area?
So there's a few bills. Obviously, I think we're all pretty well versed with Bernie's bill for Medicare for All. But even prior to that, I think it was Representative Conyers, or former Representative Conyers before he left, who had brought up Bill HR 676. And that's a bill that, the first question that people ask you when they ask about who's going to pay for it, how are we going to pay for a single payer program? It's impossible. Well, this bill actually had laid out a little bit more detail on how we can pay for this. And the number one thing that he wrote on there was to increase the tax on the top 5% earners. And that's something that obviously did not happen with this new tax cuts, this new tax bill that Trump is pushing through, where he said that the people who are going to profit the most from it were the average, hardworking, honest people. But that was a complete lie. All the cuts have gone to the corporations again. So I think you start seeing dollar signs popping up everywhere in this conversation, but that's really what it is. It's money has infiltrated everything. But that's one of the bills I fully supported. And I think it's not a dead bill yet. I think it's still pushing through.
Okay. The situation with HR 676 is this. The bill was taken over by Keith Ellison. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's now his bill, and it's the same bill as the by Conyers bill was. Okay, there is a way, an important way, in which the Conyers bill is better than the Sanders bill, and that way is that Conyers bill would be implemented immediately. So inside of a year, the implementation would be done, whereas Bernie's bill has a plan in it
of transitioning.
Yeah, a transition plan to phase in Medicare for all. And the problem with the phasing in is this. There are each year fatalities due to a lack of insurance.
Absolutely.
And those fatalities are substantial. The last study based on hard empirical data was actually completed in 2005, a long time ago. I'm talking about for the whole nation now. Okay. And that study showed that in 2005, the death rate was roughly 1 in 1,136 people who were not insured. It was something like that figure, okay, in any case. So for the 45 million people who were not covered then, there were 45,000 fatalities. Now, the population of the United States in 2005 was 299 million. Okay. Well, of course, 2006, 2007, 2008, okay, and so on. Each year, the population of the United States grew somewhat. And we're now up to 326 million people. Mm-hmm. So if the situation had remained the same in terms of the ratio, we would be looking now at something like 55,000 fatalities per year. Well, we know that the insurance situation pretty much stayed the same from 2005 until the crash. But then we know a lot of people lost their jobs.
Right.
And with their jobs, they lost their coverage. So we can expect that when careful studies are done, they will show that the fatality rates or the total fatalities increased so that by 2009, 2010, okay, and so on, they were probably in the neighborhood of 52, 53,000 people per year. Now, I used the fatality rates from a 2005 study and from other further studies that were done on smaller populations. Mm-hmm. To estimate what fatalities due to lack of insurance were during the Obama period, even given the passage of the ACA. And the totals that I got from 2009 to 2016, and I'll send you a copy, okay, of the article I wrote on this, was 356,000 fatalities for the 7 years involved. Or as I like to say, 100 times the 9/11 fatalities that we experienced on that day. That was the number of Americans who died who did not have to die. Okay?
Right.
Because we did not pass H.R. 676 in 2009 when we could have, had we pushed for it, had we not been concerned about the insurance companies and had we not been concerned about the jobs in the industry, okay, the insurance industry. So again, here we are nearly 10 years later, and Bernie Sanders is still concerned about the transition period and the jobs in the insurance industry that would be lost if we shifted rapidly to a Medicare for All system. And so he wants to phase it in over 4 years to trade these jobs. Well, what I want everyone to know is that this is a trade-off of insurance industry jobs for lives. And there's not even any guarantee that the net jobs lost would be what essentially now amounts to 650,000 because due to the Affordable Care Act, numbers of people employed by the insurance industry are larger now than they were, okay, in 2009. 2009, there are only about 450,000 people, okay, who were employed by the insurance company. Now there are 650,000 people. Because, they had to handle the marketplaces, all this, I don't know. But anyway, right. 650,000 people. Well, they are going to lose their jobs. But of course, the Medicare, the companies and the parts of the government handling Medicare will be expanding. And estimates done in 2009 suggest that half the insurance company jobs, which would be opened up in the government and in the nonprofits that do certain things for the government, would be roughly 50% of the jobs in the insurance industry. So all those 650,000 jobs would not be lost. Also, there was an econometric study done by the California Nurses Association in 2008 that was reported on early in about 2009. And that study showed that net gains from passing a Medicare for All bill, specifically HR 676, in terms of employment, that there would be a net gain of 2.5 million jobs if such a bill were actually passed.
Right.
Now, as far as I know, this is the only econometric study that has been done to estimate any possible jobs gained from passing that. Now, I don't know if the same conditions would hold now. There probably are better techniques available now, okay, and better data available now. We just don't know. But the idea that actually passing such a bill would cause the economy to deflate, it seems to me, is a questionable but kind of notion. But there are quite a number of people who I respect and whose general views, okay, on economics are very similar to mine, who are suggesting that to pass the Medicare for All bill is likely to be deflationary, okay, if nothing else is done, for the simple reason that the greater efficiency of such a system would result in a reduction of what we spend on healthcare from $3.4 trillion per year to roughly one half of that, which is perhaps $1.7 trillion per year. And so they reason that the removal of that spending from the private sector would be a deflationary event. I reason that that is not so. And the reason why it's not so is because though people would not be spending money to pay for deductibles, for co-pays, for the premiums in terms of, private insurance company premiums, and though overall people would be saving $1.7 trillion, those savings would go to private sector people who were paying for health care. And since, as far as I know, there was no deficit spending that was going on in the healthcare industry on the part of the government, all healthcare costs, the taxes, the fees, the premiums, the insurance, the whole thing, were coming out of our pockets, private sector pockets. $1.7 trillion of that money was going to the insurance companies. If the insurance companies were not there, it would be going to other parts of the economy. Mm-hmm. And as far as I can see, that might be an inflationary event rather than a deflationary event. But especially for poor people and for middle-class people who were spending in the health insurance area, they would be spending on other things, and their fiscal multipliers are higher than the fiscal multipliers of many of the people who are working in the healthcare industry.
Right.
So that's another reason why, okay, it might be inflationary. I suppose my final conclusion is that I don't know whether it's going to be deflationary, okay, or inflationary. But I'm pretty damn sure that not waiting on this is going to save thousands, okay, of lives. and that's why H.R. 676 ought to be passed, or if a Sanders type of bill is passed, then there should be no transition period in such a bill. It should be implemented as fast as we can implement it. Now, judging from the speed with which we implemented the original Medicare for All bill in 1966, it ought to be possible to implement H.R. 676 at this time with the computer resources that we have now in roughly the same amount of time, which was about a year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really see the difficulty in that.
I don't see it either. And I think sometimes when you see this type of negotiations, it's just to appease certain people that are going to continue fighting for just to prevent you from getting there. And it's something that I talk about all the time, even with the ACA. You know, I'm not going to go bat for the ACA when I'm going to get the same type of pushback from if I went all the way with Medicare for All and I wanted it today, you know, instead of tomorrow. So why go to bat for a grain of rice when I can have a whole bowl later? So that's kind of what my whole thing is making sure that we have people who are going to fight. I'm proud to know some people who are running who have been activists, who are more vocal about their opinions. You know, we keep seeing this backtracking from the Democratic Party in office right now, and it's heart-wrenching to see that we support these people who are not doing anything for us. But that's one of the reasons why I still talk about 676. I hope this bill is not dead, and I hope that we can push it through.
Okay. What I think, though, is if you want to push it through and you don't want to have a delay, then I think the fatalities question has to be put front and center in terms of the negotiations, that other people in Congress have to be made aware that there is a trade-off of time to implement versus fatalities that we can expect. And the numbers, are in the thousands. And I think that anybody who votes for delay or votes for a lesser bill has to be made aware of the trade-off, so they take personal responsibility for voting for that kind of trade-off. It just seems unconscionable to me that people would trade jobs on roughly the same scale for lives. In other words, it's not a case of trading 45,000 lives for 60 million jobs. It's a case of trading. I mean, I don't even think that makes sense. But one could argue, of course, that if people lose their jobs, there are going to be fatalities too. So, there are lives getting traded, in that instance. But with such a small number of jobs involved, it seems to me there's no excuse for making such a trade-off. So, okay. So going away from that issue then, and getting on to education and your views, on education. Could you go into more detail on those, please?
Yeah, so one of the big things that I want to focus on in this race, there was a club locally here who did a poll, and one of the things I didn't mention earlier, but this district has voted for McClintock in immense numbers. He's won by 62%, I think, in the last election. So trying to cater a message.
Okay, so if you should freeze, then you might have to go away and come back in, and we'll wait for you. if you can hear what I'm saying. I'm looking at my screen. I don't appear to be frozen. The vagaries of the BeLive application, I'm afraid. Okay, she's going to try it again. She should be back in just a minute, folks. Here we go. Okay, hello.
Did I lose you there?
Yeah, for just a moment, you froze. You were just starting to talk about education.
Okay. So one of the big things that I wanted to focus here, obviously it's K through 12. I have an almost 13-year-old daughter, and I've gone through the ins and outs of trying to provide her the education that I think that she deserves. And it's something that is close to me. I was the chairperson for the policy council for Kids Count Head Start locally. I was a parent volunteer, but I was putting in 30 plus hours every week, trying to make sure that we advocated for early childhood development, for early childhood education, and that we were trying to push for grants to be sent down our way, because that's one of the biggest things that we are missing out on is the actual funding that's going to the right places. So it's one of the arguments that we hear all the time, that we're spending so much on per student, but the money is actually not reaching the students. And so I was an advocate for that. But here in California and throughout the nation, we don't have equity in our education. And currently, to make sure that you have the proper resources for a proper education that's going to set you up for success, you have to have won the zip code lottery. You had to have been born into the right zip code. And that's something that I struggle with. I was a young parent. I got married early. We both realized that living on the wrong side of the tracks didn't offer the best school. And of course, I was a casualty of the recession. So when that happened, not only did I lose my job, but I lost my place, my family, like everything just collapsed. And the resources monetarily just weren't there any longer. So my daughter was struggling in school. I went and asked for help, and they basically told me that the school that she was attending was one of the lowest performing schools in California. And that here's a list of other districts that I could apply to. Here's a list of other resources that I could go to. And I said, so there's nothing that you could do here? And they just said, no, our budgets are cut all the time. Our programs are cut all the time. It's just the way it works. And so when they told me to go apply to another district, to me, working two really crappy part-time jobs and trying to find a way to get my daughter to that other school, it was just impossible. So as a young parent, I was sold the dream of the charter school. They promised me everything. And I had heard bad things about it, but because this was one of the first schools that was opening up, being part of it from inception, I thought that I could make an actual impact. Well, I was wrong, because these charter schools are for-profit models that don't include the students or the teachers in their model. It's just for profit. And so, after learning my lesson, I became public enemy number one for them, because I started asking for their budgets. I started asking where the money's going. I started asking why we were losing so many teachers. I was asking why we were fundraising money, and none of it was going to what its intended purpose was for. And, they started blocking me from dropping off my daughter. So I remember one day just pulling my truck and just blocking traffic so that no one could drop off their kids, because I wasn't getting any answers. I pulled my daughter out of school mid-year, and it was only because I got clever and I got lucky enough to find a modular home, a trailer park in one of the richest areas in the county where I live. This county, in Placer County, there's a town called Granite Bay. And the average home sells for about $900,000.
No.
Luckily, there's one trailer park here, and this tiny trailer, just sold for, just they were trying to get rid of it as fast as they could. So we moved in here, won the zip code lottery by chance, and I was able to put my daughter into this school where they have resources, where they have mentors that come in and teach them science, and I'm their science mentor, teach them how to code. They have an organic garden. They have a robotics program. They have immense resources that are not available elsewhere. And it just became clearer and clearer that money is being allocated elsewhere, regardless of what Title I says at the federal level. It is, I would say, it's just the same way that we were segregated back in the day. We are currently being segregated by socioeconomic classes. And that is something that we must actively work against, because we are setting ourselves up for failure. So when it comes to education, I want to make sure that Title I actually works. I want to make sure that the money that's supposed to go to your child's education actually gets there, and that the superintendents for that school district are not allowed to say, well, because this side of the tracks has better homes, better property values, we need better schools and better teachers, that they don't neglect the kids on the wrong side of the tracks. Because that's about 90% of our population is the average low-income families that are still making less than $30,000 a year. And that's something that I am an advocate for, is making sure that that the funds are not reappropriated in the wrong way.
Okay, very, very good. Let's move on to the economy.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the economy, at least where I live, like I mentioned to you earlier, I was one of those people that lost my job, lost everything through the recession. But in this district alone, we haven't fully recovered. And I know that much of the nation still hasn't recovered. We have stagnant wages. We have job creation that never was created. We have given now cuts after cuts to corporations, loophole after loophole, where they're supposed to be trickling down all these jobs for us, but they're not happening. And if they are poor wages. They are inconsistent hours when you can't plan your life around them. So just based on my view of having a family and speaking to people throughout the district who are now adults and can't start a family, who have roommates into their older ages because they just can't afford to live where they work. In this district, we have Lake Tahoe, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, but people cannot afford to live there. The average income there is about $20,000 a year. So, because it's a very service-driven industry. And so we have people who are moving across the border, I kid you not, to Nevada, to Reno, just to be able to work in the Lake Tahoe region. So they are commuting back and forth across state lines. So I fully support increasing the minimum wage at the federal level, not to 15, not to 17, but I want it to where it would be if we had kept up with production. And that would be at about $19.50. And I think that is about a living wage. And that's something that would help our economy. It would help bring in more jobs. I truly believe that if you actually have money to spend, you are going to put it back in, and you're going to be getting something back out of it. It is, I compare it to my experiences. I've had jobs where I've made great wages. My first great paying job was about $20 an hour. And I just thought, wow, look at all this extra cash I have. Really, it was nothing. But it was something that I was putting back into the economy. When I went back to working these 2 part-time jobs that were awful and I was getting paid minimum wage, well, I was actually shuffling through bills. And so the corporations weren't getting my money. I wasn't going out and spending any money. I had a tiny, tiny budget. So all of those things play into the prosperity of our nation if we start thinking about how specific things damage our culture. And the reason why I'm such an advocate for raising the minimum wage is because we have families who are one-parent households like mine, where the parents just don't have the ability to be there for their children, to pay more close attention to how school is going or how things are running. And all of that starts at what you can provide for your kids. And if you don't have the security at home, then we're falling apart from the ground up.
Yes, I agree. But I want to make a comment on the minimum wage. On your website, it says that you want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So why haven't you changed it up to the 1950 that you mentioned?
Because I am my own webmaster. So that's one of the things that happens with progressive grassroots run campaigns. My logo, my website, my everything is run by campaign manager Roza Calderon. So that's the only reason I haven't updated. But I actually just sent out a newsletter addressing that specific issue, because we really are, here in California, we're going to get the $15 by 2020, but it's just not enough. That campaign started in 2012. And if you look at how inflation keeps going, it's just not enough. By the time that the law catches up, it is just simply not enough. And so that's one of the things that I talk about when I talk about taxes, because to really get people on board, sometimes you have to talk money. When I talk about taxes, I want to talk about it as in a form of an investment, right? As citizens, we invest the money out of our paychecks, not just for representation, but for securities, liberties, and services. And if we're not getting any of those, then what the heck am I paying taxes for? And so if I'm going to be paying a certain amount, I want to be able to earn a living wage. I want to be able to provide for my family. I want my kids to be able to have the opportunity to go to school or go straight to work, whichever it may be for them, but to at least have the option. I want to make sure that our tax rates are actually lower than corporations, because there's no reason why huge companies like Google and Apple are getting away with murder by not paying a zero, absolutely paying nothing with taxes, and us losing so much money in our yearly income, and then having to have this loss even greater after this new tax bill that went through. So
okay, well, I do want to talk to you about taxes and how you're going to pay for it, okay, and things like that. But before we get to that, okay, I also want to say that the 1950 that you're advocating for is still less than what some other people are advocating for in their run for Congress. Mm-hmm. For example, there's a candidate in the Georgia 10th, okay, who's advocating for $20 an hour right now. And I talked to somebody about a week ago who was in a little higher cost area. I don't even know if it's a higher cost area, okay, than yours. And they had calculated that to keep up with productivity gains, it was necessary to offer a living wage of $22 an hour. Okay, and my own thinking on the subject suggests that what people should be getting across the country as a minimum wage is, in fact, a living wage. And we have to ensure that it is a living wage and that it remains a living wage. Okay, and I don't think that a living wage is the same thing, okay, and I might be wrong about this, in your congressional district as it is in Los Angeles, for example, or in San Francisco. It certainly is not the same as it is in the middle of New York City, okay, or in certain areas of Alaska, Hawaii. So the living wage will vary across the country. And I think we need a law that basically adjusts the living wage by region, by locality in the country, using the CPI to do that adjustment. And so it would then be the case that if you lived in the middle of Kansas, for example, where the cost of living is extremely low, okay, or in Ironwood, up in Michigan, you might be making the $15 an hour. But if you lived in the middle of New York City, the living wage might be $28 an hour. To me, that's perfectly fair, and that's the kind of law that we ought to have. But I want to get into another area on this also. We can set a living wage by law, or we can have a federal job guarantee program that guarantees full employment to everyone, regardless of the business cycle, where the jobs are defined by local communities but are funded by the federal government, and where the salaries of the people working on those jobs are directly paid to the individuals that are working on those jobs. And it's the expenses connected with those jobs that go to the local authorities that are hosting the work in some sense. Okay. This kind of program would really transform the whole United States. It would create every area within the United States as a full employment area, okay, and every area having a healthy economy. The work done in such a program would be for the public purpose as defined by the local authorities. By the public purpose, I mean what people decide that they need to have done in the local community, including the people participating in the job guarantee program. In other words, there would be a bottom-up element in such a program that would be very important. And so now the legislation for these programs is being but developed at such places as the Sanders Institute, and through such researchers as Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity, okay, and Mark Paul, and Pavlina Cherneva, and Stephanie Kelton, Randy Ray, Bill Mitchell. Lots of research on this. It goes back years and years and years now. But Pavlina has worked on proposals in this area now on studying what a job guarantee would involve for 25 years. Okay, since I'm sure she was an undergraduate 25 years ago. Okay, but she's been working on it for that long. Okay, and others in this movement that have been in favor of the job guarantee have been working on it even longer. Some for 45 years and for 45 years. So it's extremely well thought out, and there are examples, okay, from around the world of programs that worked, and we're pretty clear in what the characteristics of those programs have to be. Now, the proposals that are out there are not completely satisfactory in all respects. For some reason, they're proposing now a job guarantee wage of $15 an hour, which, as we discussed, we think is too low.
Right.
Okay, and so that would have to get adjusted. But at the same time, the people developing these proposals are doing heavy empirical research and also computer simulations to try to gauge the impact of the program, including the inflationary impact. Okay, and in connection with the job guarantee program, its face cost would be expensive, depending on variations in the program. I've seen costs that start out in the economy we have now at roughly $650 billion per year, and some other proposals would range probably as high as $1 trillion per year. However, That's not the true cost, because when people are employed at a living wage, okay, then the need for housing is not the same, okay, as it is now, and the need for drawing on social safety net programs are not the same as now. So various kinds of social safety net programs would cost a lot less. They would still be there because the job guarantee program does not replace any of the social safety net programs. It's just an independent program. But the point is, if people use the program and signed on to the jobs, okay, and got a living wage, dollars we spend now on those other programs would shrink to a fraction, okay, of what they are now. So we would be likely to find that the cost of the program is far less than the face value at the start. Also, when the economy fully recovered, then the private sector would be coming in because sales would be there, and business responds to sales, and when the sales are there, businesses invest. And that's when growth occurs in the private sector. So private sector people would want to get people to work for them, and they would have to pay more than the job guarantee was offering. Higher salaries and better fringe benefits, and the job guarantee fringe benefits, if we don't pass a Medicare for All bill, they would include Medicare for those people who would be in the program. And if we did pass a Medicare for All bill, then the fringe benefits that were part of the job guarantee program would not have to include that because they'd be taken care of by a Medicare for All bill. So the point is that as the business cycle turned around and as we got an economy operating at full potential, let's say a $750 billion expense estimate for the program to employ, say, 24 million people might very well shrink to 250 billion or 200 billion to employ people who had not gone back to the private sector. So the size of the job guarantee program and its cost is self-adjusting with the cycles in the economy. But I'm sure, okay, about now, and based on what you said yourself, that you know that any policy proposals such as this, such as the education proposals that you're for, the Medicare for All proposal, the infrastructure, the green jobs proposals, all of those proposals involve major increases in federal spending, and you're very aware of the how you're going to pay for it question. So what I'd like to do now is to suggest an answer to that question for you. And what I want to do now is show you an answer to that question in one sentence. Okay. And I'm going to put this up there solo so you can see it and other people can see it as well. And the question is, your programs look expensive. How are you going to pay for them? So, just imagine yourself in a forum or, getting interviewed by CNN, and they say, but Rosa, how are you going to pay for them? And the answer is, where Congress will just order the Federal Reserve to give the Treasury the money.
Right.
That answer is perfectly consistent with Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which gives Congress the authority to create and spend the federal money. And the Federal Reserve is a creature of the Congress, created by Congress and regulated by the Congress. It has to take the orders of Congress in bills that Congress actually passes. So this is a one-sentence answer. Okay, now I can give you a longer one-sentence answer to this if you have, more time than, let's say, 30 seconds to answer the question.
Yeah.
I can give you a paragraph answer, which I suppose is about a minute, okay, or a minute and a half answer, okay, or a 2-minute answer, and I'll send those to you after the program, okay, is over. But for now, what I want to do is put up, and I'm not going to read this, but I'm just going to show it to you, the language of the legislation that would implement this way of paying for things. And there it is. And you can see it's 2 sentences. Each sentence is a paragraph. So these enormous spending bills we have, okay, appropriation bills that we have.
Right.
These 2 paragraphs could be put in right at the end, okay, of any appropriation bill. What the first paragraph does is it pays for spending, for the spending Congress is ordering the executive to do. Even if it's deficit spending, there is no need for the executive to float any bonds because the money is being supplied to the Treasury up front by order of the Congress. The second sentence and the second paragraph provides for the Federal Reserve to give the money to the Treasury that it needs to pay off the debt instruments that fall due during the period of the spending bill. In other words, during the period covered by the law, all of the debt instruments would be paid off by the Treasury Department, getting the money directly from the Federal Reserve to pay off the debt instruments, which means, of course, that the Treasury would not have to float any more debt, wouldn't have to roll debt over anymore. It would pay off the debt without taxing people anymore to pay off the debt. Within 6 months, because so much of the debt is short-term debt, and so much of the debt is falling due within 6 months, the size of the national debt would fall by roughly, in my estimation, $4 trillion within 6 months. So people could see there's no $21 trillion debt anymore. It's now 17 trillion or 16 trillion because Congress changed its way of actually funding Treasury spending. In other words, it arranged it so Treasury spending was now transparent and was no longer dependent on complicated procedures involving coordination between the Fed and the Treasury for the Treasury to get its account gradually filled up due to tax revenues that were collected or bond revenues from sales, okay, of bonds. Those procedures would not have anything to do any longer with spending by the Treasury. So your next question has got to be, well, what's going to happen to inflation then? And the answer to that question is, well, the bonds would no longer be sold, but the taxing would still go on. And when the Federal Reserve settled the tax debts, okay, it just would not go further and create any further money for the Treasury, because the Treasury would already have gotten its spending money from the Congress. So in settling the tax debts, what the Federal Reserve would do is what they actually do now, if you look at the procedures very carefully. They would simply cancel the tax debts out, or report to the Treasury the tax debts were canceled out, and the money would disappear from the private sector, just as it does now when the Federal Reserve marks down the private sector accounts of those who paid their taxes. So that's the way it would work. Now, to control inflation, what Congress would have to do then is to pass a separate taxing bill. In other words, the spending bill would come first. Then Congress would have to pass a taxing bill sufficient to drain enough money out of the private sector so inflation is not likely to happen. Mm. And so in this particular scheme, spending is for the public purpose, for providing benefits for people and doing what the government has to do to perform its functions for the people. And taxing is for draining excess money out of the private sector so inflation does not occur. Okay, and these, according to the MMT School, of Economics, these are actually the functions of spending and taxing right now. It's just that these functions are obscured by congressional procedures and by the procedures of the Fed and the Treasury in coordinating the flow of spending money into the Treasury account. And one of the reasons why this is obscure is because for many years, Congress has been using this pay-go system, which is so much in the heart of Nancy Pelosi and others like her. They live and die by the pay-go system. They've been strangling America by using the pay-go system for years and years and years and years. This isn't a pay-go system. This is a spend-drain system. Okay? And this is the system, the spend and drain system, which is consistent with the reality of federal financing right now, rather than the fantasy which is implemented in the pay-go system. So when you get to Congress, one of the things you may want to do is to implement the spend-drain system and end the pay-go system. So the first thing that Congress actually looks at is, what is its duty to the people? What does it have to spend to solve problems, actual problems? And then once it decides on its spending and passes a spending bill, it can then decide on how much money it has to drain out of the economy by taxing the people that it thinks should be taxed in order to drain money out of the economy and not have an inflationary event. Okay, and the goal of this spend and drain deal would be to have full employment at all times and price stability at all times. Price stability is just as important a goal as full employment in this particular scheme of things. So it's a very fiscally responsible thing. It's not fiscally responsible in the sense of the debt to GDP ratio, which isn't a measure of fiscal responsibility anyway. This is fiscally responsible in the sense that people get what they need from the government, and the government sees to it not only that they get what they need, but also that there's no inflation as a result. And that's what makes it truly fiscally responsible. So this is a new thing. No one has proposed overt congressional financing before, so far as I know. I first developed this language roughly at the end of November 2017, and I kept refining things to answer the how you're going to pay for it question in a simple way that that would be appropriate for candidates, who are on the trail.
Right.
And who couldn't give a 10-minute answer or a 15-minute answer. Okay, but only, a 1-line answer or a 3-line answer or a 5-line answer. So what I'd like you to do is to take that into consideration and to not worry so much about the taxation part in terms of matching taxation to the program. Worry first about the programs. Pass the appropriations without a taxing bill. Then go in and figure out what we need to do, in terms, of tax. Because the truth about the taxes is that really in our system, in terms of the mechanics, Stephanie Kelton will tell you, and she will show you, because her thesis, was on this, that federal taxes do not pay in actuality for federal spending. So the question is, why tax? And the truth is that there are a number of reasons to tax. Mm-hmm. And here are some reasons to tax. First, when you tax and people need the federal dollar to pay their taxes, then that drives the value of the currency, because alternative currencies can't compete with that. You can't settle your tax debts using anything except for U.S. dollars. At least that at the banking level of the Federal Reserve, there must be access to U.S. dollars to pay off the tax debts. So that gives the value to the dollar. That's why people must have it, and why eventually they want to use it. Then, though, taxes are also important because they reduce demand in the economy and control the inflationary forces in the economy. And that's a second reason why we tax. The third reason is to express the policy of the federal government in the distribution of wealth and the distribution of income. Taxes can do that by taking away wealth and taking away income, in both cases, which is excessive and which represents a threat to democracy, or which rewards certain kinds of practices. And this gets to the next of the bullet points. There are practices that the government may want to discourage in the economy. In other words, practices that undesirable practices by business and by people that a democratic government, small d democratic, will want to discourage. Those are popularly known as the sin taxes. Mm-hmm. Now, there are lots of things that probably should be considered sin taxes that are not considered sin taxes as yet, but for example, the behavior of corporations that pollute the environment and that move us now towards and actually inside of a global climate crisis. And these companies have gotten away with the behavior involved without actually paying for any of it, just throwing it onto the shoulders of the public, just essentially flushing it down their toilets. And we're at the bottom of their toilets. And taxes need to be employed to discourage that kind of thing. And then also, finally, you might use taxes, okay, in order to get people to be directly responsible for the kinds of things that are done for their benefit. It isn't to pay for those things, because it doesn't actually pay for those things. But there's a function, okay, of user taxes, which essentially says to people, you are getting the benefits of all these things, so you should have a sense of responsibility about those things. So we're going to tax you to make you realize the value of these things which we are doing. Now, since taxes collected for that purpose don't really pay for the things, it isn't necessary to do a dollar-for-dollar trade-off, okay, in those instances. It's only necessary to tax enough, to give people a decent sense of appreciation for what, for the public benefits, okay, that they're getting from the government. Okay, and so these are good reasons to tax. They're all good reasons to tax. But paying for something is not a good reason to tax at the level of the federal government, because the federal government, Congress, can issue the money of the federal government at will. No state government can do that. No local government, okay, is able to do that. Those government entities and all the other entities in our society have to get federal dollars to spend. That's the difference between the level you're moving up to now, hopefully, and the level that you've been at before. The financial calculus is very different. To try to make them the same is really a sin. It's financially irresponsible, because in Congress, you have far greater policy space than will ever exist for state governments. First of all, one can be pretty sure today that a full employment budget would involve deficit spending of certainly over $2 trillion, perhaps as much as $2.4 trillion to $2.6 trillion. And right now, even with the Trump tax cuts in place, according to CBO, we're only going to be at $850 trillion of deficits for this year. And then in a couple of years, it'll move up to $1 trillion. So we're not actually deficit spending enough. We have a tremendous amount of policy space. We have enough for Medicare for all. We have enough for a federal job guarantee, as long as green jobs are created as part of the federal job guarantee. We have enough for a green program, okay, and for energy conversions. There's enough money for all of that before we hit the demand pull inflation barrier. So I think Congress should be filling this policy space with spending for the public purpose, which will require careful judgment by Congress, a realization that certain things are for the public purpose, certain things are only for private purposes. And federal money should not be wasted on private persons. It should not be wasted for the purpose of paying off one's cronies, as is now so prevalent in politics. So that's where economizing in federal government spending ought to come in. But we shouldn't be economizing in spending on the public purpose. So, okay, I guess I'd like to get your reactions to all this.
Well, I think that's something that most people don't know, and because that's one of the things that is one of the toughest things to be able to explain to the general public is how federal spending actually works. Most people are somewhat confused in assuming that our federal budget is handled and managed the same way that a household budget is used, where you allocate money for what you're going to spend it for. It's an actual budget. But that's probably the biggest separation. And that's why we get that answer constantly of how are you going to pay for this? Whose pocket is it going to come out of? And of course, because they're looking at the federal level and viewing it through the scope of their municipalities, whether it's their local city services, they assume that it's the same model all the way around. So that's, the way that you've explained is, at least to me, half of that is something that I probably already knew to some depth, but the rest, trying to tell people we have the money. And the reality is we do. Like I say that all the time, we have the money. If we can decide to pull in $67 billion into the military budget and non-discretionary spending, then we absolutely have money for other programs. That's one of the things that really needs to resonate with the general public, because they want to, like myself, sometimes I assume that everything is almost as pay as you go. And in fact, it's one of the things that, as a progressive candidate, when we talk about Medicare for all, is something that's continued to be a message amongst candidates, is that they keep saying that it's going to be a pay as you go kind of program, but it's really not.
Yes, that's right. Okay, it's really not. And so again, to bring this up again, when you get to how you're going to pay for it, the question, if you answer that question, okay, in this way, it's hard to deny the truth of that statement, because it is consistent with Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Okay, it is a simple answer. It may raise all kinds of questions in their minds, which can be answered in more detail at a later time in informal settings, okay, where you explain to a group of people in more detail some of this. I fully recognize you can't, explain it all. That's something which is going to take actually a period of years for people to get used to this. But to answer the how you're going to pay for it question with this one sentence answer, saying, hey, we're Congress and we have Article 1, Section 8 behind us. We think that we can afford this, but if there are any problems, okay, of affordability, this is how we're going to afford it in a manner completely consistent with the Constitution of the United States. And while we're doing this, we're going to order the Federal Reserve to pay off the federal debt, not all at once, because all at once, okay, is inflationary.
Right.
But gradually as it falls due, which is not inflationary. It turns out it's no more inflationary than actually continuing to issue debt. So, and that can be explained also in a very simple way. Okay, the debt instruments, okay, that are issued, they can be used at private banks as collateral for loans. and they are used in that way. And some of the debt instruments can be multiply, can be leveraged, but more than once. Okay, and multiples. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. So the point is, the debt instruments, okay, that are out there themselves are a source of expansion of the money supply through their use in the private sector as collateral for loans for business. And there's no reason to believe, based on the data, that simply creating the money and not issuing debt along with it, which is what this does, is going to be any more inflationary than the system that we have now.
Currently, right.
Okay. And the point is, the beauty of this is that you're not only offering to spend in this way, but you also are offering them the possibility that the debt that they are so worried about, that they hear about all the time, is finally going to be paid off, and without taxing them a nickel more than they're paying now. I mean, I think it's a campaign solution.
Right. I mean, yeah, and that's a big problem right now here, not only in this district, but in a lot of the seats that we're trying to gain, is this concern about debt, especially through the Obama years, and now apparently nobody cares now that Trump is doing it, but it's still the same debt that we need to take care of, and the longer that it remains. One of the things that I was looking at is, where does our tax money actually go? It goes into paying for the interest on our debt rather than.
No, not really, because it doesn't really pay for anything.
It just sits there.
Yeah, I mean, it's destroyed by the Federal Reserve, which then newly creates the money the Treasury will use to pay off the interest on the debt. Yes, but one thing which is true is that the tax money that is collected at this point gives the Federal Reserve the rationale that it needs to mark up the Treasury account. In other words, to credit, the Treasury account, because it's the kind of rationale, that any bank has. So it gets to use that with the Treasury spending account. But in fact, the reason why the Fed can create the new money that it does create in the Treasury account is because it's using the authority that Congress gave it to mark up account balances in accounts that were resident at the Fed, at the Federal Reserve banks. The authority to create that money comes from Congress. It was delegated from Congress. And it has the warrant of Article 1, Section 8 also.
Yeah. But Congress doesn't work like Congress is supposed to. That's the challenge we're facing. And that's one of the big things that we have to really focus on. And, I try to connect with other candidates because I know that I don't know everything. And I've watched your show before, so I think it's great that you actually take the time to not just ask questions and hear our talking points, but to educate us further on these issues and help us out with our talking points. Because, really having an understanding, a concrete understanding of something where you don't stop and think about what your response is going to be, because they're no longer talking points. It's actual knowledge that you're using and pushing forward on your issues and finding solutions for those problems. So thank you.
But thank you for coming on. Is there anything else that you'd like to inform us about that we haven't covered in your platform that you think is important to cover? Immigration.
Yes, I was just going to say immigration.
Very important issue.
Yeah, so I know I didn't really go into my background, but today I'm a geoscientist and I'm a small business owner, and I own my own little trailer in the most richest neighborhood in the area. But I didn't start here. My family immigrated from El Salvador. We came to the U.S. as political refugees during the civil wars that were going on down there. And my mom actually left my sister and I behind while she made this trek, risking everything. And until she reached the border is when she reported herself to customs and let them know that she was here, to Border Patrol, and let them know that she was here and she needed asylum because of the dire situation that we were in El Salvador. So, people were risking their lives because they had no other option. If they stayed behind, they were risking it regardless. And we were lucky enough to be granted that protection at the time. And of course, we went through all the steps of becoming residents and then applying for citizenship. And it's something that has allowed me to become an activist, a business owner, and all of those things because I was given and afforded that opportunity. But that is something that is not available any longer. And in fact, even when my family was immigrating to the U.S. as refugees, it wasn't it wasn't awarded to every person in my family. We were one of the very lucky ones. Some people were just turned back because, Bush and Reagan had created this narrative that people were here looking for economic prosperity rather than, running away from the civil wars that were raging throughout Central America. And that's one of the things that is at the forefront today, right? We have a lot of problems with immigration. We have a backlog that extends, 3 to 5 years, depending on the city or the court that you're going to go to. We have people who have absolutely no rights, so they don't have the right to representation. And this includes children. I was watching John Oliver's show a few weeks back, and that's something that they brought up again, children who are 2, 3, 4, 16, 17, they are going into court and defending themselves without any counsel, without a parent present, because they don't have the same rights that anyone here has. The other thing is, obviously, I really want to address the fact that because of the backlog, because of the lack of representation, nobody can really state a case of why they deserve to be here, and that's one of the things that I'm mostly concerned about. I'll tell you a quick story, but a few years back, my uncle had to go renew his residency card here in Sacramento. And when we arrived, we came in and there was a gentleman just outside the building and he had a letter with him. And he had gone in and they just kind of like waved him away and told him to go away. And when he came back out, I asked what's going on, because he looked just distraught. And he said, well, I received this letter and it's my deportation letter. It says to report to this specific building and nobody here knows what I'm talking about. And I said, what do you mean? And so I read the letter and it says report to this building at this time on this date. And here is the guy really self-deporting. And I go inside the building and the people who are there, through security, they say, well, we don't do anything about that here. So he's just going to have to call the number on the paper. And I said, but the letter says that this is his last notice and he has to come here and turn himself in. They had no idea. The whole process took about 2 hours to find someone that was able to answer his question. And what they ended up doing was telling him, you need to call this number and let them know that you want a court date. And from there, that's how the process starts. And I said, is there like a legal counsel group in the building or he can speak to or anything like that? And they said, no, he's going to have to find that himself. There's no legal counsel that's provided. So he ended up leaving. I didn't ever follow up with his story, but that is something that happened right here where nobody knew what was going on in a letter that clearly said you are being self-deported today. So, if he had gone home or if he hadn't shown up, what would have been the backlash that he would have received? Would he have been pulled out from his home? And so we need to streamline the process. We also have to end this ridiculous quota on desirable and undesirable countries. I come from that list of the shithole countries of people who are not wanted in the United States. Yes. Another wave of Salvadorians came here on TPS because of the the earthquakes, I'm sorry, that happened. And none of those things are being addressed. It's just like your time is up. You got to go. It doesn't matter that you were here for this long. And just thinking about being pulled from the nation, the place that you've grown up, and everyone that you know overnight, it's just an unimaginable thing for me. I can't imagine it. And it's happening to friends of mine who were here illegally and now maybe had gotten protections through DACA, and now those are gone. And so where are we left with immigration today? We have politicians who every single election tell us that there's going to be an actual immigration reform that they're going to work on, but nothing has happened since I think like the late 1980s when the last wave of my family came here. And since then, nothing has been done about immigration, the quotas, streamlining the process, or creating a path towards citizenship for those who are already here.
Yes. So, what is your plan to settle the crisis?
So the first thing that I want to address, obviously, is the 11.5 million undocumented people who are in the United States. We have to start with the problem that we have in front of us right away. And number one, obviously, funding would be monumental for a project this big, because the reason for this enormous backlog is because we don't have enough judges to see or hear these cases. We also have to have the funding to be able to provide at least counsel or even translators to speak to these people so that they can have formulated defense. They're going in there, children are defending themselves. People who don't speak the language, who don't have a translator, are just standing there as a judge, deports them. So creating the funding for those two things is the main criteria. Obviously, every person that we screen is going to have to be on a case-by-case basis. It's just something that is inevitable. Even when you apply the right way, it's an individual process. They want to look at how you're going to sustain yourself, where have you been working, what you do you have a criminal background, all of those things still apply. So creating an actual path for the people who are already here, creating a streamlined process of application and deadlines and extended dates is something that we have to start on right now. When it comes to this ridiculous wall, there's already a wall there. I don't know if you've been down to the border before, but there is an enormous fence there. It's not a wall, but it's definitely a fence. And so I remember watching Sessions and just hearing him just describe immigration in such this, I don't even know what the word is, but the way that he expresses himself is just, it's horrible. It's disgusting. He's speaking about immigrants as if they're not even human, as if they are just the scum of the earth, and how we need to get them out of here. And I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but every single time he talks about it, he has this glow and grin on his face of he's going to finally get his way. And one of the things that he's pushing for outside of, streamlining this process, which he's okay with funding, but he only wants to fund judges if they speed up the process, don't give any counsel, and if he actually can step in at any time to overturn their cases. So he's even pulling the judges independent, the independence of these judges to make these calls. So those are things that are happening today that maybe it's finally going to push politicians to do something about immigration that they've been promising for decades. But it's something that needs to be addressed right now. I don't see any other way for it to continue to just be put in the back burner.
Okay, so if you guys are Congress, let's start by asking, what would you do specifically for the Dreamers?
So for the Dreamers, I would actually, the DACA program was really like a limbo state program. They were kind of put in this little box and they expected Congress to act, but Congress never acted. And so they were just in limbo. I don't know what else to call it. And so for the Dreamers, of course, I would not just extend the program, but I would implement an actual path towards citizenship, the same way that we have it for people who have applied for the residency card and then going into citizenship. So that's one of the things that I would implement right away. I was just disgusted.
So I agree with that, but I have a further question. Okay, and that question is, why wouldn't you simply grant them citizenship? They've grown up here, but they're Americans. They don't have any other place to go. We collectively provided the conditions under which they grew up.
Right.
I think we owe them citizenship, and it should be immediate. And there should be no more fooling around with it, and no more past the citizenship. Okay, and none of that crap. Just they are our, collectively speaking, they are our kids.
Right.
We have to fix it for them.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think you should go in with that and not try to be reasonable. Just go in and work for that, and do it just as forcefully, okay, as possible. You may have to compromise. You may not have to compromise. Never pre-compromise. Go in with what is just. What is just.
And I have to tell you
is that they get citizenship. Period. Immediately.
Right away. And I completely agree with you because, like I said, the only thing that separated me from a dreamer was the fact that we were able to get political asylum. That's it. You know, had they told my mom to turn back and go back to her country, I guarantee you that she would have made every effort to get back in here and bring us the same way that she helped many members of my family cross the border. And to be honest with you, I grew up here my entire life. I've traveled to other countries and immediately they know that I'm American, you know, so I don't have the accent from El Salvador. I'm not well versed on the culture in El Salvador. It's my heritage, but it's not who I am anymore. And I am Californian. I am an American. And if someone told me to go back after I've spent my entire life here, I would just be completely lost. My entire life would fall apart. And I completely agree with you. I do believe that our dreamers have already gone through enough processing already to even become a dreamer, that the 800,000 people who are under DACA protection should just be granted citizenship. And in another way, I want to talk about this because, you know, the Dreamers Act, the DACA protections, the protections for the parents of the dreamers, these are patches that we're adding everywhere. Why not fix the entire damn system at once instead of patching little bumps here and there?
Yes, I completely agree with that. Okay, and certainly for the people who have gone into the service, okay, and who have come out of the service, they should be immediately granted citizenship as well. It's just unconscionable that they are not, and that some of them are being deported right now. That is awful.
Right.
It's awful.
Right.
So anyway, okay. Yes, I completely agree with you on immigration. We need a systematic plan for the whole thing. Shouldn't be done, okay, in patches. But those are two specific things that I would like to do for two parts of the problem. Okay, now as far as past the citizenship, are concerned, I think the paths should be designed in such a way that people who have lived here for a long time and are also basically Americans can very easily convert. I mean, why are we keeping people out who are already here and who have been contributing for years and years and years? I don't see the logic in this. If we put in a federal job guarantee program, they could get out of the shadows, okay, and could work in the program and could move from there to jobs in the private sector when they opened up. There would be a full integration, and all the people would be contributing in full to the development, okay, of our society. That's what we should be working for.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of my family falls in that category. I have to share a story with you about a cousin of mine who went through the court system for almost 2 decades and just, kept challenging every step of the way. Really, what would have been a 1 year process elongated to about 15 years of him going back and forth and challenging. Eventually, after all of that time, and he is, I think, about 2 or 3 years older than I am. So he came here as an infant as well. And he was granted a work permit after living here his entire life until his until adulthood. And I just found that absolutely insulting that he was
Oh,
granted a work permit that expires and that he had to continue applying and proving that he's an upstanding citizen because apparently 30 plus years of his life weren't enough.
just incredible. Just incredible. Okay, there's still the human rights platform to go through, and you've got a very strong plank on that. So I think we'd like to hear about it.
Okay. So you want me to just start?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Please, please.
Well, yeah, I think, I created just a human rights tab on my page because I really didn't want to separate so many things into what should be just well-known human rights and liberties, but I wanted to address specific ones. And one of them, which is always just neglected, is about the Native people in the United States and their treatment, and people who are not acknowledged by the federal government currently. So those are things that I really wanted to address and talk about. I wanted to make sure that, especially here in California, we have so many tribes who have not been recognized by the federal government, and I think that is insulting. I mean, here we're talking about immigration, but that is the largest insult, is by not allowing someone to be recognized in their own home.
I know. It is absolutely the largest insult. Okay, is there anything else you wanted to say about the LGBTQ program, the BLM issue?
Right. I'm running in a conservative district, and when I chose to run, like I said, I wanted to do it my way. I was not going to hold back on how I feel about certain things. I don't have a campaign management team because they want me to talk about specific talking points, and Black Lives Matter was one of the points that they wanted me to exclude entirely from my platform. In this race, like I mentioned to you, there's other 4 candidates that I'm running against, plus the incumbent, so 5. Not one of them has mentioned Stephon Clark, and it's in our backyard. It's happening here in Sacramento. None of them have not even mentioned it publicly, bothered to do it, at least a tweet. And it's because Black Lives Matter does not matter to their platform. And I think that's a disgrace, that people have to step away from certain issues, step away from being human just to appease a larger base. And that's disgusting to me. I actually went out there just as a concerned citizen, because I think that what had happened was questionable. I had seen the video. I think I even got a little bit obsessed with trying to analyze the video and try to see both sides of what was happening, but I just could not grasp the concept of not even trying to subdue the person that they were after. It was just a kill. It really was. It was a murder, cold-blooded murder. And so I chose to march. That's the first day that we took on the highway. We shut down the arena, and I wanted to talk about the fact that people don't understand what Black Lives Matter means. And what you always get back is, well, everybody's lives matters. But what they're missing is that Black lives matter too. And that's something that is not being recognized. That's something that we continue to push boundaries on, with mass incarcerations, this school to prison pipelines, this over-police neighborhoods and communities where there's a police officer in almost every single corner. So even before you are questioned on a crime, you're already guilty. And so that's kind of what had happened in that video, is that they had received a call, they were looking for someone, and if they saw someone, one of the things that you hear the helicopter person say is, there's a guy wearing a hoodie and he's coming to this side. And so again, we go with these assumptions of who people are based on the color of their skin and the neighborhoods they live in, and that's why that altercation just escalated so quickly, and there was no turning back. So to me, addressing Black Lives Matters is as important as talking about immigration. It's as important as talking about the economy and taxes. It is something that affects our daily lives, and I'm not going to hold back from talking about it.
Yes, and neither will I. But thank you very much for coming and for sitting through with us and providing all your perspectives, at least the ones on the platform.
Mm-hmm. We didn't even get to the environment, and I'm a scientist, but for a few reasons, I've pulled my environmental platform from my website, and that is because I've actually worked in this area. And I was here in California. We have a major problem with the bark beetle infestation, and it's obviously it's a cause after the drought that we had for almost a decade here in California. And so the bark beetle has really taken over our forests. We have over 130 million dead pines in California, and it's just fueling the fires. We have, dry soil, everything that is just happening. What you saw last year was California on fire. Those are all things that are effects of climate change and climate policy that is not addressing those issues. So because of what's happening, we have this snowball effect of problems. So the bark beetle infestation problem has created dead trees, has basically it's new fuel for fires. Insurance companies are taking advantage of the situation, and they're doing LiDAR, basically satellite images over people's homes and deeming them uninsurable, canceling their policies or raising their rates to just enormous, absurd prices. And these are regions, of course, that are rural, where people don't have too much money. And some people just never get paid out by their insurance companies. They'll find any excuse. So if they put a new coat of paint on their deck, that's one of the reasons that a gentleman and his wife told me that their insurance policy didn't pay them out. And so they have been living in an RV with a tent over it now for 2 years, because they haven't been able to, number one, get the jobs that will help them rebuild their home. They never got the insurance payouts. And so the people who are coming to these regions, to these counties, to buy up properties is the cannabis industry. So the cannabis industry is coming in with duffel bags of cash and offering people cash for their properties. So they're leaving. They're people from the Bay Area who are coming in also and doing something similar. So they're inflating the prices in a very impoverished area. And people are no longer able to live there. So this is almost like I'd call it, reverse gentrification, because these old mom and pop shops that used to be there can no longer afford to pay the rent on the establishment. So you drive by down Sonora and you see all these 415 phone numbers from the Bay Area. And so the prices have just increased. A lot of bed and breakfasts, Airbnbs. It's just something that has continued creating this effect. The other thing is, because of the fires, people rushed to get any property that was available, rentals, homes for sale. And so they created a housing shortage, which used to be there for the communities that used to come in for temporary work. So the orchards, the wineries, all of those people who used to come in and live on those properties and just be there temporarily for the seasons and then leave, they no longer have a place to stay. So nobody's going to travel 4 hours to come work for a minimum wage. So one of the things that happened about with that was that the cannabis industry came in and is offering healthcare, is offering housing, is offering, $20+ an hour. So they have created an additional shortage on orchards. And so it all goes back to why we're not even addressing climate change. And it just had this snowball effect of problems that these people didn't need. So that's something that we need to start addressing right now. As a scientist, I've not only seen the data, I've studied the data, but I'm one of the people who collected the data. I've been out there with my old truck that I sold to run for Congress because it was not too great on gas, but marking every tree, taking all the attributes of those trees and putting them on a data table, working with CAL FIRE, sending this information to PG&E so that they're able to do the right-of-way clearings. All of those things need funding. They need research. And research for anything scientific is it's the first thing that's being cut right now, especially under Pruitt. So all of those things need to be addressed quickly because we don't really have a plan B. We really don't. And we're coming to a point where there will be no point of return anymore.
Yes, I know. The job guarantee, of course, is a way of addressing the climate needs. In other words, it's a way of actually providing jobs where people can do the things they need to do to manage climate change, and it could be locally oriented. In other words, it is a locally oriented program. So if you need people to work on this locally, and as you said, there is no funding for this now, there would be funding provided by the job guarantee program. Just as part of the program, it's up to the local community to define what they need to have done. If they need to have this done, then it would be done under the program and funded by the federal government, and there would be the funding there. And it would be part of this $650 billion or $750 billion a year. Okay, and it would stay there as long as the needs stayed there, and as long as people still wanted to work for the solution. I suspect, with respect to a problem like this, there probably would be many people who would not even want to go back to the private sector. They just keep on working on this just to solve the problem in their local area so that they would be able to continue to live in that area. And so we view the job guarantee program as very much connected to the green jobs issue and to the climate management issue and to the food desert issue and organic farming, aquaponics, things that need to be brought to areas all across the United States that could be part of the job guarantee program. Okay, but again, if you get involved in the job guarantee program and the other things, that we talked about, then again, as you know, you're going to get into the how you're going to pay for it question. And you got to have an answer that's airtight.
Yeah, and that's something that I've actually thought about because, we have, like I mentioned, we had a drought for almost a decade. Unfortunately, when Governor Jerry Brown called off the drought, that also stopped funding that we were receiving from FEMA to address the problem. So, yeah. And I can guarantee you that regardless if the drought was over, we had not replenished our aquifers or gone back to the levels that we need to replenish our water sources. So with that being said, I know that we need a multi-agency project. I know that if we did have a job guarantee program in place here, it would be beneficial for the people who haven't recovered since the recession. We're talking about the logging industry. We have loggers. I mean, our forests are overgrown. There are places that machinery will not reach. I mean, this would put people back to work. This would be a project for our environment. This would be a project that would be not just 5 years or 10 years. We're talking about decades-long, a decades-long project because we still have to work on restoration and we have to work on on creating sources so that we can do water storage. So those are all things that would create jobs. And it's the way that I see it when I'm talking about this issue throughout my district. I'm not asking people any longer to go and look at rising sea levels. I'm not asking them to go see the temperatures in the waters. You know, I'm asking them to look outside their window at the dead vegetation around their home and understand that they cannot afford to get those trees cut down because the demand has just exploded. So people are asking for $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 to cut off one tree. Sometimes people's properties are surrounded by public lands, so they don't even have the rights to cut off those trees. So they're just in so much peril and so much danger currently that they all can get behind a program to bring money so that we can get people back to work and take care of this problem with the bark beetle and the environment.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I think we've been through it. The only thing we haven't really covered is the foreign policy. And I'll be happy to have you back to discuss some of these issues more and foreign policy as well. But I think for tonight, we should probably call a halt to this.
Okay.
And but give you a chance to rest up for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's warm weather, so we're probably going to plan a kayak with the candidate thing. It's one of my favorite things to do out here, and we can go pull some invasive species from the lakes and the river. So it'll be fun. Yeah, we'll have to enjoy this warm weather for this next 5-6 days. I think we get it for.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so good luck.
Thank you.
I guess in a few weeks we'll be back in touch, okay, for another session.
Okay, sounds good.
You know, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Like I said, I love this opportunity because it's not just rapid fire questions and a quick response. It's an actual dialogue and learning. So I'm all for it. So thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and again, thank you very much for coming. So I'll see you again, hopefully soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh. Okay, so I forgot one thing that was very important. Okay, and that is the donation button for Roza Calderon. Okay, it is Rosa with a Z. So I'm going to tell you what the donation button is. I guess I'll tell you where it is. Okay, because it is an Act Blue button. And I think I'd rather give you her website to just hit on her button. So if you go to www.elect Roza, ROZA.org, you'll find that right at the top of the page. I'm double checking now that this is the case, but you will find right at the top of the page a donation button, which will take you to the Act Blue site. But let me verify this because for some reason it's not coming in as quickly as it should be on my machine. I have no idea why it's being so bulky right now. Okay, so it's not right on her homepage. Oh, yeah, it is on her homepage. Okay, there's a donation button right on her homepage. So scroll down a little. You'll see three buttons: a join the team button. You'll see a donation button, and you'll see the enter site button. And so she's at www elect Roza, and that's all in lowercase letters .org. Okay, and you'll see these buttons on her site, and if you're so moved, then you can leave a donation. Okay, I also want to point out that Real Progressives has a Patreon account, and you can go to Patreon and search for Real Progressives, and you can leave a donation there if you are so moved. And I also want to tell you that I have a Patreon account. Okay, and you can go to the Patreon account if you are so moved, and you can leave a donation there. And I am well aware that you probably won't be leaving donations, okay, at all three places. And we'll be doing this infrequently, but whatever you can do will be greatly appreciated, okay, by all of us, okay, as it always is. And your attendance tonight was greatly appreciated as well. And all your comments, okay, were greatly appreciated. We haven't had a chance to go over them, but I'll be commenting on the site. In other words, I'll be answering some of your comments afterwards. And it may be that pretty soon I'll be moved just to have a program which is devoted to my Q&A sessions, where you can bring up all kinds of issues. I'm particularly interested in getting feedback about, well, really two issues now. Okay, one issue is the format, okay, of my programs. In other words, the way I go through the platforms, the way I introduce some of the key issues, including, of course, Okay, so I don't know if anybody's here, but I was kicked off because my internet, Comcast, simply went down on me. So that's what had to do with that. Anyway, I was about to sign off anyway. According to my indicator here, there are only 6 of you who are still with me. So I'm just going to say good night and end in an orderly way. So this recording, okay, is ended also. So thank you again for attending, and good night.